Welcome, sleepy traveler. You've arrived at a quiet space made just for you. My name is Valarie, and I am here to guide you gently into rest, to help ease your mind, soften your body, and drift you toward a peaceful, uninterrupted sleep. Whether your day was long or your thoughts feel a little too loud tonight, let this be your permission to slow down, to breathe, and to simply be. There's nothing more to do now. Just allow my voice to be your guide as we begin this gentle journey toward deep, nourishing rest. If you're new here, subscribe for sleep content like this, and like this video if you find it enjoyable. Let's begin. The day is done and you've done enough. Now is the time to rest, to soften, to simply be. Let your breath begin to slow without effort. Notice the gentle rise of your chest and the slow release that follows. Each breath like a wave returning to shore. You are safe here. You are supported. And you are allowed to let go. Let the muscles around your eyes relax. Let your shoulders fall away from your ears. Feel the heaviness begin to return to your limbs. The kind of heaviness that only comes when your body feels safe enough to surrender. With each slow inhale, breathe in ease. With each exhale, release what you no longer need. Any thoughts still floating in your mind can simply drift past you like autumn leaves. You don't need to hold them. You don't need to follow. Just notice them and gently return to your breath. You are not your thoughts. You are the quiet space beneath them. Let your jaw unclench. Let your chest soften. Let your hands uncurl, open and unguarded. This is your moment to unwind. No pressure. No effort. Just presence. Just peace. Just the sound of your breath and the quiet of the night. Notice the space around you. Feel how still the air has become. Feel how your body begins to mirror that stillness. There's nothing left to plan, nothing left to solve. The day has already happened. And now you are allowed to release it. You are allowed to stop. You are allowed to rest. Your body knows how to relax. It's been waiting for this permission. And now you've given it. Feel the bed beneath you, steady, warm, and still. Let yourself sink into its comfort. Let yourself be cradled by stillness. You don't need to hold yourself up right now. You are being held by the bed. By the earth. By the rhythm of breath. By the gentle lull of the night. Your breath is your anchor. It is always here. A quiet, steady friend. Inhale and exhale. Feel yourself arriving deeper into calm. Your thoughts don't have to vanish. They only need to slow. To float like feathers in soft air. This moment is a soft one, and so are you. There is no rush. You are not behind. You are not late. You are exactly where you're meant to be. Your breath continues. Soft. Steady. Sure. Feel how the day has melted away. The busyness. The noise. The movement. Now replaced with silence. With calm. with stillness. Let your breath carry you like a boat on gentle waters. Floating further and further from the shore of the day. You are moving toward peace, toward deep rest. There's no destination, only this journey inward, into the softness of your own being. Let your belly relax. Let your spine settle. Let your entire body release what it's been holding. This is the rhythm of rest. The rhythm your body was designed for. Deep, gentle. You are safe here. Let the night blanket you in peace. Let the stars keep quiet watch. Let the hush of darkness soothe you. There is nothing to do now. There is only being. Only softness. Breathe it in and breathe it out. The quiet is growing deeper, and you are moving with it. There is a part of you that remembers how to rest. How to dream, how to let go. That part of you is waking up now. Just as the rest of you falls asleep. No need to chase sleep. It will come when you're ready. It's already coming. Already near. Already brushing at the edges of your thoughts. You're doing beautifully. You are safe. You are loved. You are enough. Exactly as you are. Right here, right now. Close your eyes if you haven't already. Let the stillness bloom inside you. And gently, ever so gently, enjoy tonight's bedtime story. It was one of those afternoons that smelled like cinnamon bark and dry leaves, the kind of golden hour that made even my old turtle shell feel a bit lighter. I'd just finished nibbling on a patch of clover near the river bend, where the sun slants low through the canopy, making everything shimmer like a fairy tale. I took my time chewing, of course. Everything worth doing is worth doing slowly, I always say. The wind was behaving mischievously that day, tugging at the ferns, sending ripples through the moss, and whisking up little acorn caps like tiny flying bowls. My walking stick, a polished bit of driftwood with a knot at the top that looked suspiciously like a smiling owl, helped me make my way up the sloping hill beside Fernwhistle Hollow. That's when I saw the first one, a feather, snow white and soft as a lullaby. It was caught in a tuft of bramble, swaying gently. Strange, I thought. No bird in these woods usually sheds feathers so fine. I reached out a slow, careful claw and plucked it free. It tickled my palm. "Well, hello there," I chuckled. Then I noticed another, and another. Like breadcrumbs in a tail, the feathers trailed down the mossy path in little scattered bunches. Some curled like question marks, others straight as a squirrel's whisker. They glowed faintly in the afternoon light, so pale they nearly shimmered gold. Naturally, I had to follow. With every feather I gathered, a quiet curiosity built in my chest, just below the spot where I keep my fondness for butterscotch root in rainy mornings. I tucked each one gently into the woven satchel strapped over my shell, the one I'd patched so many times it looked more quilt than bag. By the time I reached the edge of my clearing, I had 13 feathers. 13. Imagine that. Back at my den, a cozy nook beneath the roots of an old maple, I laid them out on my workbench beside the small teapot I keep warm all day long. The scent of chamomile filled the air as I poured myself a mug and settled in. What to do with such delicate treasures? I rubbed my chin thoughtfully. Perhaps bookmarks for Juniper the badger, who's always misplacing her stories. Or maybe quill pens for the young mice learning their letters. I once knew a beetle who taught penmanship, but he kept dropping his spectacles and inked his antenna by accident. No, these feathers seemed special, like they were meant for something more. As I sat sipping tea and staring at the soft little pile, the wind gave a gentle sigh through the rafters. One feather floated upward, twirling like a dancer. I reached out and caught it, laughing softly. Then it struck me. "Lantern tales," I whispered. When I was just a hatchling, there was a traveling storyteller who visited the forest once every blue moon. She wore a coat stitched with stars and carried lanterns with feathered tassels that fluttered when she spun tales. I remembered sitting wide-eyed as those feathery lanterns bobbed in rhythm with her words, like living punctuation to every twist and turn of her story. That night I lit my lamp and stayed up sketching. A curved bamboo handle, a round frame of willow twig, and a soft paper shell painted with forest scenes. And from the base, a tail of floating feathers that caught the wind. I could see it in my mind as clearly as I saw the moon through my window. Morning came slowly, as it tends to when you're eager. I stretched my legs, a lengthy process, mind you, and began my work. I gathered twigs and bark thread, brushed off the dust from my paints, and let my ideas unfold like mushrooms after a rain. By midday, the first lantern was finished. It wasn't perfect. My claws had grown stiffer over the years. But oh, how those feathers danced in the sun. I hung it from a low branch outside my den and sat back to admire it. That's when Snip the squirrel bounded by. "Mossy, what's that?" he gasped, tail twitching. "A lantern," I replied, beaming, "with a feathered tail." Snip stared. "Can I have one for my birthday, or maybe 12, or maybe a giant one I can hang from my treehouse?" I chuckled so hard I nearly tipped over. "Let's start with one, dear Snip." By evening, word had spread. Animals came sniffing and patting and fluttering in. Badgers, birds, chipmunks, even a curious fox. Each one left with a promise from me. "Come back tomorrow, I'll make one for you too." And I did. Each day after that I followed the wind. More feathers arrived, floating through the trees, snagging on bark, resting on toadstools like sleepy dreams. I never saw where they came from, but I never asked either. Sometimes the forest gives without needing to explain. I turned them into lanterns, big ones, tiny ones, round ones that glowed like harvest moons. I painted them with sunrises and fireflies, with stars and sleepy hills, and always gave them tails of dancing feathers. The forest changed. At night, little glowing shapes bobbed through the woods, carried by young paws and tiny wings, by wrinkled hands and trembling claws. The forest looked like a dream, lit by gentle colors and silent movement, like the stories had climbed out of our books and into the trees. And I, old Mossy, sat on my moss-covered porch, sipping tea and watching the lanterns flicker by. Sometimes a little mouse would stop by, or a shy owl would leave a note. They'd tell me how the lanterns helped them feel safe, how the feathers reminded them of loved ones, how the soft light made them feel less alone. Funny, isn't it? All from a few feathers on the wind. I still don't know where they came from, but every time I find a new one, I smile. Because sometimes all it takes is a bit of kindness, a soft moment, and a feather drifting down at just the right time to light the way forward. And I, Mossy the lantern maker now, shall always be ready. The morning light filtered in through the root curtains of my den, golden and gentle, like a yawn stretched too far. The kettle on the moss-covered stove was just beginning to murmur, and I was halfway through arranging the feathers I'd collected the day before. Some were curved like crescent moons, Others speckled like mushrooms after rain, and a few shimmered faintly when the light hit them just right. I'd been sorting them for days now, by size, color, softness, mood. There were comforting grays like river stones, cheerful yellows like dandelion puffs, and a few iridescent greens that made me think of hummingbirds darting through the elderberries. I didn't yet know why I was so drawn to them, only that each feather felt like it belonged to something kind. As I reached for my cup of nettle chamomile tea, a soft knock echoed through the den. It was Tilly. Tilly, the garden spider with the kindest 8 eyes you've ever seen, stood at the entrance with a bundle on her back, wrapped in dew-kissed leaves. "I brought you something," she said shyly, antennae twitching. She unwrapped the bundle, revealing a spool of silk, glistening, strong, and delicate as the breeze that carries whispers. "It's from last season's webbing," she explained. "Too soft for catching supper these days, but it might suit a gentle project." "Tilly," I breathed, moved in that quiet way only turtles can be. "This is more precious than morning sunlight." She beamed. "I thought you might be stitching something. You've been humming." Had I? I suppose I had. After she left, I cleared my little work table, an old slice of cedar wood polished smooth over years of mossy elbows, and laid out the feathers in small clusters, grouped like puzzle pieces waiting for a story to make them whole. I carved a needle from a fallen pine branch, carefully sanding the end with river stone until it glided through silk without catching. Then, with thread looped gently through, I began. The first stitch went through a soft gray feather and into a deep brown one with edges frayed like memory. I worked slowly, one tug, one breath, one hum at a time. Downy feathers made the center of the patchwork, a nest-like heart for warmth and comfort. Around those, I stitched feathers of bold color, crimson, sunflower, indigo, teal. Feathers that reminded me of wildflowers, sunrise berries, fox fur, and singing beetles. Each one had a story, though I hadn't written them down. The blue feather with the broken tip, I'd found it on the stone where Bramble the badger naps every Tuesday. The soft white one? It floated to me on a breeze that smelled like cinnamon bark and apple skin. The tiniest speckled one? Caught in the fur of a hedgehog who didn't notice. And so it went. Stitch by stitch, the quilt began to grow. It took me days, no, weeks, but time behaves differently in my den. It unfolds like a fern in spring. When it rains, I sew by lantern light. When it shines, I stitch by the doorway so the forest can keep me company. One afternoon, I paused to look at what I had made so far. The quilt was larger than I'd intended, more colorful too. It looked like the forest at twilight, alive with rustling stories and drifting warmth. I placed it over my lap and leaned back in my chair, letting the weight settle. It wasn't heavy, not at all. And yet, it felt full, like it was holding not just feathers, but memories, tiny wishes, whispers. Still, I didn't know what it was for. I'm not a fast thinker. I like to let answers simmer. Some folks rush for meaning, but I prefer to let it arrive on its own, like a curious deer at the edge of a clearing. The next day, Pipit the chickadee visited. She darted in, chirped a hello, and dropped a tiny bell on my table. "I found it caught in a branch," she chirruped. "Thought maybe your quilt would like to sing." It was a sweet idea, so I stitched the bell into one corner. When the wind brushed it, it rang with the softest chime, just one note, like a star blinking. A few days later, Bartholomew the mole stopped by with a pouch of lavender and thyme, which he insisted I tuck into the seams. "For comfort," he said, blushing beneath his whiskers. Soon my little patchwork of feathers had become more than a quilt. It had become a forest in thread and softness. Each animal who stopped by offered something: a pressed leaf, a shiny beetle shell, a poem written on birch bark. I stitched them all in. I didn't understand why it felt so important, only that I had to keep going. One foggy evening I sat by the fire, quilt over my knees, tea in my hand, and a hush in the air that made the embers pop a little louder. The wind knocked gently at the root door, and I heard the tiniest rustle. It was a lost mouse. She peeked in, shivering, with ears drooping and paws trembling. "Oh dear," I said, heart blooming. "You've been walking a long time." She nodded, wordless. I invited her in, wrapped the quilt around her small body, and handed her the warmest mug I had. She curled into the folds and let out the softest sigh. Then, like magic, she fell asleep. I watched as the quilt settled around her, the bell barely ringing, the herbs letting off a lavender hush. And that's when I knew. It wasn't just a quilt. It was a resting place, a nest for wanderers, a warmth for the weary, a patchwork lullaby stitched from kindness and quiet hours. It didn't need a name, but I called it Featherfell in my heart. Now it rests always on the chair beside mine, for those who wander in need, for those who don't know they're tired until they feel safe. Sometimes it cradles a fox kit who wandered too far, sometimes a songbird with a bent wing, sometimes a hedgehog who just needs a break from the noise. And always, always, it reminds me that the softest things often carry the most meaning: feathers, threads, moments, and an old turtle's quiet hands. Yes, Featherfell was never just mine. It belongs to the forest now, and I still stitch, you know. There are always more feathers, always more stories. The cold had arrived like a sigh in the night. One moment, the forest had still been wrapped in the golden shawl of autumn. The next, frost kissed every leaf and curled the edges of mushrooms like old parchment. Even the moss, usually my favorite cushion, had stiffened into a silvery crust by morning. I'd taken to brewing extra strong tea, the kind that smells of cinnamon root and makes your shell feel a bit less creaky. I wore 2 scarves instead of one, and lined the inside of my den with pine needles and dried fern. It wasn't unpleasant, just still. The forest was quieter, holding its breath. I was nestled in my chair with Featherfell, That's what I'd begun to call the quilt, soft and full of stories, draped across my knees when I heard it. The tiniest rustling at the edge of the clearing, too light to be the wind, too hesitant to be the fox cubs playing tricks again. I leaned forward slowly, and there, under the ghostly light of a half moon, was a small figure stumbling toward me, her tail dragging like a forgotten ribbon. "Tansy?" I called gently, unsure if my eyes were playing games again. "Is that you, little nut forager?" The squirrel lifted her head, barely. Her fur was dusted with frost, her paws trembling as she tried to speak. "Mossy," she whispered, voice thin as thread. "I didn't know where else to go." I was already reaching. "Come now, no need to explain. You're safe here." She collapsed beside me, breath coming in short clouds. I took Featherfell, still warm from my lap, and wrapped it gently around her shoulders. The moment the quilt touched her, I felt it, like a hush descending. The shivering eased, her eyes fluttered. She let out a long, weary sigh and nestled into the folds like a child returning home. I placed a cup of nettle tea by her side and tucked a pine-cone candle nearby, its glow flickering softly. Within moments, she was asleep, cheek pressed to a corner stitched with sun-yellow feathers and tiny bells. I watched her for a while, my old heart swelling in a way I hadn't felt since the lantern-making days. Tansy had always been the one darting tree to tree, laughing with acorns in her cheeks. To see her still, shivering, lost, it shook something loose in me. That night I didn't sleep much, not out of worry, but out of knowing. Featherfell had work to do, and so did I. By morning, word had already begun to spread. You wouldn't think the forest could gossip, but oh, it can, especially when something kind has happened. The chipmunks came first, 3 of them, wide-eyed and wrapped in little strips of birch bark. Then came Larkspur the raccoon, clutching a broken umbrella and muttering about a surprise hailstorm up north. And later that evening, 2 sparrows and a porcupine named Flint, all of them tired, all of them cold, all of them looking for something warm, something soft, something stitched with story. I didn't have enough space in my den for everyone, of course, but I had an idea. There's an old oak tree just to the south of my home, so ancient its trunk is hollow and its roots curve like gentle arms. I used to nap beneath it as a hatchling. It's seen every season and it listens when the wind speaks. So I brought Featherfell there. I laid it beneath the oak's wide limbs on a bed of dried moss and woven bark. Then I hung a tiny wooden sign from one of the lower branches. "Rest here, traveler. The quilt will keep you." I didn't expect much, maybe a fox or 2, perhaps another squirrel. But I underestimated what kindness can do. The very next morning a line had formed. There was Bramble the badger, whose den had flooded in the night. There was Pippin the owl, unable to fly from frozen wings. There were field mice, wrens, a stoat with tear-streaked cheeks. Some came alone, some in pairs. Some just sat beside the quilt for a while without speaking, their eyes soft with remembering, and still the quilt held them. It didn't wear out nor stiffen in the cold. It seemed to know how to curl around whatever creature needed it. Sometimes it wrapped tightly around tiny, shivering bodies. Other times it simply rested beneath a visitor like a cradle of forest feathers. And me? Well, I became something of a caretaker. Each morning I'd check the quilt, fluff it, tuck in stray feathers, add a few pine cones around the oak for extra coziness. I started boiling a bigger pot of tea too, kept warm by a flat stone I placed in the fire overnight. I left mugs nearby, clean and ready. I never asked questions. Didn't need to, because every visitor gave something back. One evening, a skunk named Marlowe left behind a stitched patch with a painted moon. "For the corner," he said shyly, pressing it into my hands. It helped me remember something gentle. I want someone else to remember too. A family of finches returned with a string of dried berries and tiny twigs shaped like stars. "For the tree," they chirped. A mole named Winslow, who hardly spoke at all, dug a trench nearby to redirect runoff water so the ground wouldn't freeze. It became more than a quilt. It became a place. The Featherfell Oak, some started calling it, and I became known as the keeper of the quilt. I'll admit I was a little overwhelmed at first. I'm just mossy. A turtle who moves slow, hums when I work, and forgets where he puts his spectacles half the time. But I understood now. This was what the quilt was for. Not just warmth. Not just feathers or stories or spider silk thread. But togetherness. A soft place to land when the world gets too hard. One particularly icy morning, I found a little hedgehog pup fast asleep beneath the quilt, her cheeks pink from the cold, her tiny paw holding a crumpled leaf with a drawing on it. It was me, sitting beneath the oak, smiling. She'd drawn Featherfell too, big and beautiful with 100 colors. I didn't wake her, just tucked a woolly scarf around her neck and sat nearby with my tea, heart full to bursting. Now every evening I light a candle near the base of the oak. A small glow, a signal, a welcome. I sit beside it, wrapped in my own shawl, watching the forest breathe in and out. And when the wind blows softly, the feathers rustle like pages in a storybook. The quilt still grows, you know. Visitors sometimes bring a feather from their travels, or a scrap of something meaningful, and I stitch them in by lantern light, humming low. One day, maybe, Featherfell will stretch wide enough to warm the whole forest, but for now it waits beneath the great oak, offering comfort to one traveler at a time. And I, old Mossy, will be here, waiting, with a cup of tea and a quiet smile, letting the warmth do the rest. The frost came sooner than I'd expected. One morning I stepped outside and found my footprints from the day before, frozen in silvery lace across the moss. The dew on the tree roots had stiffened into crystal beads, and the breeze, usually playful this time of year, had grown shy and sharp. I tugged my scarf tighter and looked over to the great oak. There, beneath its strong limbs and against the trunk's warm hollow, lay Featherfell, my patchwork quilt of feathers and thread, stitched with the gifts and stories of those who'd visited before. It hadn't faded. In fact, it seemed to glow brighter in the cold, like it knew its purpose better now. A squirrel had once asked me how something stitched from such delicate things could hold so much warmth. Because it's made of more than feathers, I'd said. It's made of moments. And now, those moments were gathering. It began one dusk when the sky was the color of soft plums and the stars hadn't yet blinked awake. I'd lit the pinecone lanterns around the oak, just enough for the clearing to glow with that amber hush that makes even the wind settle down. The first to arrive were the mice, 5 of them from the Bramble Nook family. The mother had stitched tiny acorn hats for each of her little ones, though they kept sliding sideways with every step. The father nodded gratefully as they all crawled beneath Featherfell, squeaking softly as they wiggled into its warmth. Next came Puddle, the hedgehog with the quiet eyes and the basket full of pine seeds. He didn't say much, just curled up near the edge and placed a pine cone beside him, like a polite offering. Then there was a stir near the edge of the clearing. A small fox stood there, pawing nervously at the ground. His fur was dusky red and dusted with snow. Not a cub, but not yet grown either. His eyes were unsure, as if waiting to be turned away. I rose from my stool slowly, joints creaking like winter branches. "You're welcome if you'd like to rest," I said gently, nodding toward the quilt. He blinked. "Even me?" "Especially you." He didn't speak again, just stepped forward on cautious paws and curled beside the mice, careful not to disturb them. The youngest mouse, Marble, I believe, sleepily curled against his side without hesitation. And that's when I knew. Featherfell had become more than warmth. It had become belonging. Night after night more came. A robin with a bent wing, a raccoon with frost-bitten toes, a shy pair of moles who'd never traveled beyond their burrow but had heard a magic blanket waited under the old oak. No one was turned away. No one asked questions. They simply gathered. And every time they rested side by side, predator and prey, flyer and digger, fast and slow, they breathed the same still air, shared the same hush, and left a little softer than when they arrived. I began stitching by lantern light again, not to repair, Featherfell held up just fine, but to add. Each visitor left something behind, a feather, a button, a thread of bark twine, a song written on a scrap of mushroom paper, and I'd stitch them in, one by one, like a secret only the forest and I knew. Sometimes I'd pause and run my claw gently over the quilt's surface, marveling at how far it had come. I could still spot the very first feathers, soft gray and speckled brown, surrounded now by flashes of robin red, twilight blue, sunflower yellow, and the quiet, earthy hues of the forest floor. It was no longer just mine. It belonged to everyone. One chilly afternoon, just as the frost began clinging to the tree bark for good, I saw something that warmed me more than any tea ever could. A group of animals were already gathered beneath the oak, sharing the quilt, laughing in soft murmurs, passing a mug of pineberry cider from paw to wing. They hadn't waited for me to light the lanterns or fluff the quilt. They'd simply come, together. Junebug the mouse was showing the fox pup how to fold a leaf into a cup. Pip the sparrow was humming a tune while the hedgehog tapped along with a twig. Even old Bartholomew the mole had brought his storytelling lantern and was croaking out tales about tunnels that led to starlight. I didn't interrupt, just sat back on my stool, wrapped my own scarf a little tighter, and watched. They didn't need me there, not really. Not to gather, not to rest, not to feel safe. But I was glad to witness it. Because that night I saw what Featherfell had truly become. A hearth without walls, a home without doors, a quiet promise that in this forest no one was too small, too lost, too chilly, or too different to be wrapped in warmth. Later, as the moon rose higher and the gathering turned to whispers and soft snores, I walked over and gently adjusted a few corners of the quilt. It rustled faintly beneath my claws, almost like it was breathing. Almost like it was alive with all the stories sewn into its seams. Tansy, the squirrel who'd arrived that first cold night, stirred in her sleep and smiled. And I smiled too. Over the next few days, animals began leaving gifts around the oak. Not for me, no, not really. For each other. A basket of dried berries, a stack of bark notes filled with kind wishes, a carving of a star left at the foot of the tree. Someone even left tiny candles shaped like mushrooms nestled in walnut shells. I found a birch bark scroll pinned to the tree with sap. This quilt kept me warm when I had nowhere to go. I'm leaving seeds for anyone hungry. Pass it on. Bree, the thrush. Another note simply read, "For whoever needs to remember what kindness feels like." Soon, little ones began bringing their parents to see the quilt, not just to sleep beneath it, but to touch the stories, to trace the thread, to learn the names of the animals who had come before. I overheard a young hare whisper, "This is where the forest becomes friends." I may have teared up a bit, though I blamed the wind, of course. Now, as I sit by my fire each evening with a new feather or story waiting to be stitched, I no longer wonder what the quilt was meant to be. It was never just a blanket. It was a gathering, a reminder, a soft-spoken truth that the gentlest things often carry the strongest magic. Featherfell is still under the oak, and I still visit daily, but I don't tend to it alone anymore. Sometimes Tansy helps me sew. Sometimes Puddle the hedgehog oils the wooden bench nearby. Sometimes little Marble the mouse sings as she brushes snow from the quilt's edges. We care for it together, because it is not mine. It is ours. A quilt for all. And perhaps that's the warmest thing of all. The first snow came quietly. No grand entrance, no swirling winds or howling skies. Just a hush. A stillness so complete it felt like the forest had paused to listen. I stepped outside that morning and the world had turned to lace, soft flakes drifting down, catching on every pine needle and tree limb, blanketing the moss in a shimmer of white. Even the air smelled different, like cold stars and pine sap and something old and sacred. I made my way, slowly as ever, to the great oak, and there it was. Featherfell, my patchwork quilt, gathered from gifts and whispers, stitched with spider silk and care, rested at the base of the oak like it had always belonged there. But now it glowed, not in a way that startled or sparkled. No, this glow was quiet. It was the kind of glow that comes from within, like a lantern remembering its own flame. The feathers shimmered faintly under the moonlight, their edges silvered by snow. And as the wind passed gently through the clearing, the quilt rustled, not like fabric, but like music, a soft lullaby, a song only the forest would know. I stood still, paws tucked into my sleeves, breath clouding in front of me, and listened. One by one, the animals arrived. They came the way they always did, but this time with slower steps, as though pulled by something they didn't quite understand. A hush followed them, like they didn't want to break the spell. First, the bramble nook mice, bundled in scarves too big for their ears. Then Puddle the hedgehog, his basket full of seed cakes and a tiny tin of honey. Tansy the squirrel darted in next, shaking snow from her tail, carrying a folded leaf with a note tucked inside. Soon the clearing was full. Moles, birds, rabbits, even the shy young fox who never stayed long but always came back. They didn't chatter like usual. They just curled together beneath the quilt, forming a tapestry of fur and feather, paws and beaks, tails and whiskers. As they settled in, their breathing rose like little clouds, puffing softly into the night. The quilt shifted gently, welcoming each body. It swelled and dipped, molded and wrapped until every creature was nestled and warm. And still that soft rustling continued. The song. I sat down beside them, my usual stool dusted with snow. I sipped from my mug, lavender tea with a hint of clove, and watched as the moon climbed higher above the trees. That's when it struck me. Every feather in the quilt had once been part of flight. Each had caught wind, carried stories, lifted dreams into sky. Some had traveled miles. Others had only ever known one grove. But they had all danced with the air, and now, though they no longer soared, they sheltered. Each feather, in resting, had become a keeper of warmth, a protector of dreams. A memory of flight turned into comfort. A hush filled my chest, the kind of hush that feels like understanding, like belonging. I looked down at the quilt and noticed something I hadn't before. There, along the edge of one pale feather, stitched in the tiniest loop of thread, was a swirl. Not a letter, not a word, just a curve, a spiral. I checked another, an old crow feather I'd stitched months ago. Another swirl. This one doubled. I leaned closer. Swirls, spirals, loops, barely noticeable unless you looked for them. And yet, They were everywhere, woven into the stitches, hidden in the pattern, as though the quilt itself had been gathering something all along. Song. That's what it felt like now. The quilt wasn't just glowing, it was singing, not aloud, no, but through every feather, every thread, every breath of the ones tucked beneath it. I closed my eyes and imagined what the song might sound like if I could hear it fully. It would sound like laughter muffled by snow, like a mother mouse singing to her kits, like wind through pine, soft paws on bark, the crackle of fire, the hum of tea pouring into a cup. Like kindness. I opened my eyes again and looked out over the clearing. They were all asleep now. Tansy nestled beside Puddle. The fox curled around the mouse kits, tail tucked close. Even Pip the sparrow had found a spot, wings twitching in dreams. And for the first time I didn't sit apart. I stood slowly, joints clicking, and stepped forward. The quilt shifted as if sensing me. It lifted a corner just slightly. I chuckled. Well, if you insist. I tucked myself beneath Featherfell, slow and careful. The feathers were cool at first, like a kiss on the forehead, but warmed instantly against my shell. Someone, perhaps the mole, murmured in his sleep and leaned into my side. I didn't mind. I closed my eyes and let myself be held. The snow continued falling. The moon rose high, the forest hushed, and still the quilt sang, not with words, with presence, with memory, with the soft, unseen thread that ties us together in the cold. I don't know how long we stayed like that. Hours, maybe, days, or perhaps just a single eternal moment when time stopped ticking and started swaying instead. But I know this. The quilt holds us all. It holds the warmth of shared silence, the strength of softness, the bravery of rest, the memory of flight turned into shelter. And when I opened my eyes again, snow dusting my nose, I didn't feel old. I felt part of something, not the maker of the quilt, not even the keeper, just one more creature tucked inside the story of it. And that, I think, is the truest warmth of all. The fireflies began to stir somewhere deep in the woods. Morning was still far away, but a new light bloomed, soft and steady, like hope stretching after a nap. I let out a breath. It drifted upward, a small cloud joining the others in the cold. And beneath Featherfell we dreamed on, together, forever. And that ends tonight's meditation. You're welcome to stay for a bit longer if you like. Have a beautiful night until next time.